Welcome to another episode of We Lit, Lead, Uplift, and Inspire, the podcast that celebrates women leaders not only in the tech industry, but also in diverse fields where they are making significant impact. My name is Molly Philibert. I am the Director of Business Development at Solucio Partners, and we have another exceptional guest on our show today. So please welcome Sonja Outlaw. She's a Director of IT, of Infrastructure and Operations at Milliman, a financial and health consulting firm. Hi, Sonja. Welcome.
Hi, Molly. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Yes. And would you mind telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am born and raised in New York, and I made a journey out to the Pacific Northwest to come out here for 3 to 5 years. And one of the things I told myself is that I didn't want to work for a public company, and I've been true to that since. And so my journey started at a biomedical research center here in the Seattle area. And I started as a system administrator, taking care of, computers and users and so forth. And through that, I've just progressed through the ranks through a lot of hard work. And I would say I sort of cut my teeth at that biomedical research organization. From there, I went to a insurance company, a dental insurance company, so on the payer side, and I did that for a few years. And now I'm here at Milliman, and I have to say it's been a really fascinating journey, and I've learned a lot along the way.
Great. Thank you for your background. That's very inspiring. Let's go ahead and just dive right into it. So, as a woman in the tech industry, Sonja, what unique challenges have you faced throughout your career?
Molly, I think it's a little bit of a sad state of affairs, but I don't know that my challenges are particularly unique. I think women in tech, and if not in any male-dominated industry, you often face the same challenges, and it just happens over and over, right? It's kind of a repeated thing. So that being said, being a woman of color, in tech, I've had a few challenges, just to name a few, which are unequal pay, right, compared to my male colleagues. And I know in my earlier career, there was more than one time that I had to go out, I had to do some research, I documented salary requirements for equivalent roles, and then presented these things to my boss, and bosses, I should say. And in one case, when it was a man, he just sort of said, oh, yeah, okay, and he sort of stepped up and did what I asked. When I did it some years later for a woman, she was outraged, and so she just made it right and went overboard. She gave me more than I had asked for, which I think was pretty cool, of course, but it just sort of compares, right, the man versus the woman's reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Another challenge is lack of representation. You just don't see a lot of women of color or women in general in technology at higher levels. Particularly in the infrastructure and operations space. And it's a little bit of a unique space, right, compared to, cybersecurity or software development. But there are limited opportunities, and it's slow for advancements. Another challenge has been not being seen or being overlooked for what I bring to the table. And I bet too many women can say they can step into a conference room or step into a meeting, particularly when you're in person, of course, and you're expected to take the notes or, get the coffee or something like that. And then a last one I would share is that my contributions are not always accepted, but restated by a man, and then they are accepted. So a case in point is I made a suggestion when I was with some colleagues many years ago, and we gathered around to come up with a solution for some issue. And the suggestion that I made, a white man told me it wouldn't work, just flat out. And really, not more than 5 minutes later did he utter the exact same suggestion as if I hadn't even uttered those words. And I was really quite frustrated, but he had shot it down, right? And then when I called him on it, he said, well, the suggestion just sounded better when I said it versus when you did. And then, of course, he crims him a little bit. So, an insult I'm sure many women may identify with is when, you're in the room, and I've talked about this a little bit already, but you're just not seen for what you can contribute, what you bring to the table, you're overlooked and things of that nature.
Can you share a specific instance, Sonja, where being a woman in tech presented a significant obstacle, and how did you overcome that?
Being a woman of color can be a significant obstacle because I cannot be a part or a member of the good old boys club, and flirt and sleep around with female staff. And, once I got very little support to effectively manage my team and hold them accountable. And this was related to my manager at the time, who said he needed to preserve his relationships with the members of my team. He had worked in the organization a lot longer than I had. And so he was concerned about how it would come across if he was supporting me and holding the team accountable with the people that he had been working with for a while. So this environment was quite toxic for me, and I really couldn't do my job. In fact, I used to say to, my friends and my husband is that I felt like my hands were tied behind my back, but I was expected to do my job. At the end of the day, I had to leave. And, I think one must recognize when it's time to throw in the towel. And I don't say that lightly. Yet plenty of women stay in unhealthy working relationships, like, or working environments. If you can't change the toxicity and your community is dwindling, or you're unable to help make a difference, I say save your emotional well being and
Mhm.
eliminate the stress. Just get out.
Mhm. Mhm.
Generally speaking, though, I consistently demonstrate my competence and I seek support from my allies and mentors. And so that is the way, that I overcome these situations.
Right, right. And sometimes, like you were saying, it is a challenge to leave, toxic environment, but you can have to take care of yourself first, right?
You really
And
do.
with throughout our conversations, Sonia, you talk a lot about your like building allies and mentors and so forth. So, what struggles have you found effective for identifying and cultivating allies, particularly as a woman in a male-dominated field?
Networking, I think that's my very first go to. I try to build the strongest relationship possible with my colleagues and peers, both in tech and beyond, and maintain those, right? And especially other women in other key roles of leadership. And, you might think they all have to be in tech, but for me, that's just not the case. And I like to keep adding to my network while not forgetting those I've already connected with. I think that's really important to maintain the connections that you've already made. I think at any organization, I find my people or community, or I put that energy out there to let myself be found by those who would recognize that energy and appreciate those vibes, that might be similar to their own. And, then I know that they want me on their short list of go to people. This community lets me be vulnerable. It is a sounding board. It helps me navigate the rough waters and it celebrates me. And all of these things come unconditionally within this community. Mentors is another. They have been a godsend for me. And I find mentors in the current organization shortly after I arrive, while trying to maintain those from the outside. And these are not the formal relationship between a mentor and a mentee necessarily, but you can identify someone who you think is competent, who's empathetic, who is a strong leader. And then lastly, I would just add that I always get to know my organization's HR and finance colleagues. And I've just found that that has just been something very helpful for me, particularly in a position of leadership when you're managing people and budgets. And, I think they already know you. And so when you have an issue or a situation or you need to come to them for resources or support, that relationship is already there. So for whatever reason, I've always built relationships with HR and finance colleagues. So.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I can feel your spirit even through this interview here that, that's your strength is the people part. So
Oh
thank you
yeah.
for sharing that with us. Yes, building
Mhm.
allies and having a list of mentors available is so key for, to all of us in any industry. So Sonia, so how do you navigate situations where you may face bias or discrimination based on your gender? And what advice would you give to other women facing similar challenges?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I often felt most discriminated by other women in tech. And for whatever reason, it seemed that we were in competition with each other rather than players on the same team, working to do our part for the greater good of the organization. The amount of backstabbing and the lack of support and bias from women is, I find, pretty incredible, if not incredulous, frankly. And in these situations, I had to determine why the other woman in tech found me threatening enough to lead the charge against me. So I guess the advice part is, do not cower, find your voice, speak up and advocate for yourself. You have to seek support from your allies, this community, mutual colleagues who are willing to assist you in whatever way that you perhaps ask them or they think they can help. Address challenges head on and with timeliness. So, you don't want things to fester or there's always this elephant in the room whenever you two come together, right? So I think there's an element of timeliness that should happen there. And if the bias or discrimination is pervasive or it just, won't go away, right? So then you have to take a different tack, right? Now you're making documentation of the issues and the instances, what's happening, how are you feeling? You might have to do some research about what your rights are in your state, city, whatever, as well as what the rules and policies are in your company. This stuff wears you out, right? And many organizations have anti-harassment policies. So I will grant you, much of all I've just said is much easier said than done, but you've got to find your way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're so right about that. And that's why, with all organizations, that harassment part, the training is so key. And that's so important, forefront with every company, I think.
Right. Right. It's interesting because I think some people think, oh, harassment only happens between a man and a woman, and that's not true.
Right,
It
right.
can happen, irrespective of gender, right?
Right. Exactly. Now, as a leader, Sonia, in the tech industry, so what steps do you take to promote diversity and inclusion, and within your team or organization?
Yeah. It's a little difficult, I would say, in my role, but I certainly pay attention to the way job descriptions are written and to make them as neutral and inclusive as possible. And so it is important to point out, however, that I have a very broad definition of diversity, right? It's not just race, which I think most people think about. Oh, diversity, you must want different races. Well, sure, but I want different abilities. I want different cultures. I want people with different experiences from different social classes who have different thoughts and ideas. I mean, this is a true diverse environment in my mind, And so I believe you have to have these different perspectives, experiences, and knowledge, etc., represented. And then from there, it is a very easy or an easier step to get to inclusivity. Another idea or thing that I do is I try to pay attention to how the executives talk about DEI in an organization and respond to DEI issues and situations. And I feel very fortunate here at Milliman, very specifically around that. And then lastly, in my one-on-ones with my team members, we discuss any instances observed or that felt less than inclusive or less than diverse. And, there's a component of allyship that sits in there, right? And so how do you give voice to folks who might not be able to get a word in edgewise, who may be put down, or, what have we observed? Are people given their fair shake? I would also say, as an example, using myself as an example, I have a colleague who has said to other peers that, would you let Sonja finish? Like, it's like I'm in the middle of saying something and somebody's just interjecting, right? Trying to talk on top of me. And it was great to have this white man say, would you just let her finish? Like, just hold your thought. And so I just felt so supported, right, in that time. And so there we go, right? Like, that's a way to be inclusive, right? He wanted to hear my voice. He wanted to hear what I had to say. I was feeling included in that moment. And so I think that's really important, that when we observe instances or we can see that people felt less than inclusive, how do we address that? And so from there, we develop steps to to take to improve the situation so it doesn't happen anymore, or at least we can reduce it.
Right, right,
It's
right.
education. It's
Yes,
education.
yes. Thank you so much for your insights on all these topics today. So thank you, Sonja. Do you have anything else that you want to add for our audience today? Any last minute thought that you want to pass along for our up and coming women leaders?
I don't know that I do. I think really stay true to yourself is probably the best words of advice that I can just leave you with.
So thank you, Sonja, for joining our show today.
No, I just want to thank you, Molly, and to Lucio for inviting me to speak with you today.
Yes. And thank you again, Sonja. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to our We Lit podcast. So we hope you enjoyed your time with us. We will continue to bring you empowering stories from women leaders who are making significant impact. So remember to embrace the possibilities of technology and never stop dreaming and reaching for your dreams, especially. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you on our next podcast.